Our second reading this morning is from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 23, found on page 807 of your pew Bibles. Would you please stand as you're able for the reading of the gospel? Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has born the King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, 'And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod summoned the wise men and secretly ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him.' After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them, until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, and said, 'Rise and take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.' And he rose and took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophets, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.' Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all the region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, 'Rise and take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead.' And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in the city called Nazareth, that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, 'He shall be called a Nazarene.'" The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Our reading from Matthew this morning reminds us that refugee children are not a new issue, as Jesus and his family had to flee from the fearful and insecure King Herod. It's sort of a foretaste of what will come later in Jesus' life, with Jewish leaders rejecting their Messiah and the Gentiles accepting him. Historically, one of the reasons that the Jews rejected Jesus as their Messiah was that he came from Nazareth rather than from the prophesied Bethlehem. The Gospels give us 2 birth stories that explain the birth in Bethlehem and growing up in Nazareth, how they came to be. It was not a case of either or, but rather of both and. The 2 events are not mutually exclusive. Matthew introduces us to the Magi, wise men or astrologers from the east who, we are told, followed Jesus' natal star to find the one who was born King of the Jews, again foreshadowing the one who would be crucified as King of the Jews, also a true son of David. So, naturally, assuming that this newborn king would be found in the royal city, the Magi stopped there to inquire in Jerusalem about this newborn king, which sends the place into a tizzy, and King Herod was frightened out of his wits, as he was a puppet king placed in power by the Romans, who really did not have the pedigree to be accepted as Israel's king. Therefore, Herod was wont to kill anyone who could potentially be considered a rival for the throne, including members of his own family, in order to maintain his power. So Herod calls for the chief priests and the scribes to find out where the Messiah is to be born. Matthew is again foreshadowing the religious opposition to the coming of Jesus and his ministry and God's kingdom. It's interesting to note that the Jewish scriptures reveal what the pagan astronomers found in the stars. And it's somewhat ironic that the Gentiles have found what the Jews will overlook and eventually deny, existing right there in their own backyard. Matthew appears to be portraying the Jewish leaders and political leaders as hypocrites, those who know the promises of the Scriptures, but who will not act upon them or even accept them. Now, Herod was dealing falsely with the Magi by claiming to also want to worship the new babe, while actually plotting his murder. The Magi joyfully act in faith upon what has been revealed to them, both in the Scriptures and the stars, while the Jewish leaders do not. So the Magi continue following the stars and the directions of the priests and scribes until they find the Holy Family. The Magi then present their gifts, which are truly fit for a king. Gold, which may help to support the family in exile. Frankincense, which was used in worship. And myrrh, which was used in embalming. These gifts also give us a definite clue as to what the life of the baby Jesus will hold. Now, you may have noticed that nowhere in our reading this morning is the number of Magi given. The New Interpreter's Bible tells us that tradition has established the number as 3 because of the number of gifts presented to the baby Jesus, but the actual number is unknown. So the Magi, warned in a dream by God, disobey Herod's command and return home by another way. Joseph is also visited by an angel. Whether the same one has visited the Magi or not, we don't know. But he is warned in a dream to take his family and flee for their lives to Egypt. Ironically, it was from Egypt that the Israelites had to flee from Pharaoh in order to regain their lives. And now Jesus' family has to flee there in order to save their lives. Joseph again asks faithfully to heavenly direction to save his family. While still a very small player in the Jesus story, Joseph is nonetheless instrumental in its success. He moves his family as directed by God, and God works to provide for them and keep them safe in Egypt. Meanwhile, Herod has finally figured out that he has been had by the Magi and reacts as he always did to maintain his place of power. He had no qualms about killing many innocent children, just as Pharaoh had earlier in trying to keep Israel in servitude in Egypt. Jesus' flight to Egypt was to fulfill the Scripture's prophecy, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." But this would not happen for a few more years until after Herod's death. But even after all this time, all might not be well for Joseph's family, as Herod's son Archelaus has taken his father's place and might be suspicious of a boy Jesus' age reappearing back in Bethlehem. So Joseph and his family are guided into further exile, this time in their home country. They leave the Gentile country of Egypt only to relocate in Galilee of the Gentiles near the Syrian border. This experience of exile would have been familiar to the Matthean community after the war of 66 to 70 AD, in which Jerusalem fell. The Christian community would be displaced, just as Jesus' family had, and perhaps they were able to draw some comfort from that. So while the Jews will have trouble with the Messiah from Nazareth, Matthew shows us that this was a God-guided event that was foretold in the Scriptures. So in this early story from Matthew, we are shown the arc of the Messiah's life. The Son of David is sent not only to the Jews of Israel, but also to the Gentiles, as we are shown by the visit of the Magi and the exiles in Egypt and in Galilee. So God is shown to be sovereign over all the world. The Bible shows us that Jesus was rejected upon several different occasions by his own people and leaders, but accepted by the Gentiles. As an adult, after Jesus' ministry is rejected in Judea, he will return again to practice in the area around Galilee. And just as Jesus' ministry was vindicated by God in his resurrection, following his murder by those he came to save, the baby Jesus was set apart and saved from those who would reject his very birth, as he was spirited away to Egypt to enable his life and later ministry. This story in Matthew shows us that God is acting on Jesus' behalf behind the scenes throughout his entire life. Violence and oppression against the poor and innocent are nothing new. It was going on before the time of Jesus and unfortunately continues until this day. Throughout the centuries, refugees have had to flee violence in their home countries and look for better living conditions and opportunities in other ones. And it seems as though they will often be resisted by those in positions of wealth and power who seek to maintain the status quo in their own favor. It seems to be the human condition. All too often, God's kingdom will be resisted by those who rule their earthly kingdoms, and the lives of the poor will be used as pawns in the hands of the powerful. Pharaoh tried to kill Moses by ordering the deaths of all male Jewish babies in Egypt, and Herod tried to keep his throne by killing all the boys under 2 years of old around Bethlehem. And all too often, innocent refugee children will lose their lives in search of better opportunities because of the actions of powerful leaders. It is up to the church to look for God's will in contemporary life. It's up to the church to try to guide those outside of the church through revelation of the Scriptures, as happened with the Magi. And it is up to the church to discern how actions in the past, present, and future will lead us once again to Bethlehem to find God's will at work in the world. For us, like Matthew, God's saving work is not to be just idle speculation about the future, but to be the basis of our actions in the present, based upon God's revelation both in the Scriptures and in our own lives. God's saving plan has been at work throughout the ages, supported by people of faith and goodwill, while being resisted by those who are protecting their own self-interest. Let us be like the Magi who look for and act upon God's revelation, whether it is revealed to us in the Scripture, in nature, or perhaps in a dream. For God is still speaking, and it is up to us to look and listen for it is still happening all around us. In the next few weeks, we hope to be welcoming seekers through the Explore God Chicago initiative. May we open our hearts and minds to them as they seek to find God at work in today's world through churches like Winfield. May we all give of our time, talents, and blessings to bring God's kingdom into reach for those who are still seeking to better their lives and to know God's will. May it be so for you and for me. Amen.